Eleanor's eyes glistened, but she didn't flinch. "You think I don't live with that every single day?" she said, her voice raw. "You think I don't hear her voice in my head? That's why I came back. I have asterisk to set it right." Reynolds' heart pounded as the puzzle pieces finally fell into place. The missing girl. The scandal. The rumors. Who was she? He asked, his voice quiet but urgent. Eleanor swallowed hard before answering. Her name was Margaret. She turned to the officers, her face etched with years of unspoken pain. "She was my sister." The words hit like a shockwave. Reynolds' mind spun. The missing girl wasn't just a maid. She was asterisk family asterisk. And Eleanor, she had spent her life building an empire while this secret stayed buried. The man, whoever he was, shook his head. "She trusted you," he muttered. "And you asterisk left asterisk." Eleanor took a step closer. "I didn't know the truth back then," she said, her voice shaking. "But I know now. And I know asterisk you asterisk had something to do with it." The man tensed, his jaw locking. "You don't want to know the truth," he said, his voice low. Eleanor exhaled sharply. "I already do." Silence hung in the air. Carter took a cautious step forward. "Sir, I need you to turn around. Hands where I can see them." The man didn't resist. He let out a slow breath and raised his hands. But just as Carter reached for his cuffs, the man turned his head slightly toward Eleanor. "She was never supposed to be found," he murmured. Eleanor's breath hitched. And then, in a sudden eerie calm, the man smiled. "Check the garden." A shiver ran down Reynolds' spine. Carter pulled the cuffs tight around the man's wrists, but Eleanor? She stood frozen, her face pale, her body rigid. Because she knew exactly what he meant. And as the weight of those words settled over the old house, one thing was clear. The past wasn't done with her yet. The words hung in the air, heavy and unshakable. Asterisk check the garden asterisk. Eleanor's hands trembled as she took a slow step back, her breath shallow. Reynolds and Carter exchanged a glance before Carter led the man outside, his grip firm on the cuffs. But Eleanor didn't move. She was still standing in the center of that old house, her eyes distant, lost somewhere between past and present. Reynolds spoke softly. "Ma'am, you okay?" Eleanor blinked, snapping back to reality. She let out a shaky breath and nodded, but there was nothing steady about her. "The garden," she whispered. It was her favorite place. Outside, the night was eerily still. The old Langford estate had been empty for years, yet as they walked toward the overgrown garden, it felt like something had been waiting here all along. Carter stood near the suspect, now seated in the back of the patrol car, his face unreadable. But Eleanor wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at the rows of wild bushes, the forgotten patches of roses that had long since wilted. And then she stopped. Her eyes locked onto a spot near the back, where the ground looked uneven, disturbed. She swallowed hard. "It's here," she whispered. Reynolds grabbed his radio, calling for backup. He didn't need to ask what she meant. Within hours, forensic teams arrived, their floodlights cutting through the darkness. The excavation was careful, precise, but deep down, everyone already knew what they would find. And then finally, they uncovered the truth. Bones. Remains buried beneath decades of soil, wrapped in the tattered remnants of a dress that had once been white. Margaret had never run away. She had never left town. She had been here all along. Eleanor covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking as silent tears streamed down her face. Carter exhaled, rubbing his jaw, while Reynolds watched as the past finally came to the surface. The man in the patrol car didn't say a word. He just stared ahead, resigned. His secrets had lasted a lifetime, but the truth had found its way out. It always did. As the night stretched on, Eleanor stood quietly by the garden, lost in thought. She had spent her life building an empire, outrunning the ghosts of her past. But now there was nowhere left to run. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Closure. She wiped her tears and took a deep breath. It was finally over. As they sped through the dark streets, Carter shot him a look. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Reynolds tightened his grip on the wheel. "I'd bet anything she's involved." When they pulled up to the estate, the air was thick with silence. The house loomed in the darkness, its once grand exterior now weathered and forgotten. A single light flickered inside. Reynolds' pulse quickened. She's here. Carter unbuckled his seatbelt. Then let's find out why. They stepped out cautiously, flashlights cutting through the shadows. The front door was unlocked, slightly ajar. A chill ran down Reynolds' spine as he pushed it open. Inside, the house smelled of dust and old wood. But there were fresh footprints on the floor. And then, from deeper inside the house, they heard it. A voice, low, steady, speaking to someone unseen. They followed the sound, each step heavier than the last. When they reached the main hall, they saw her. Eleanor Sinclair stood in the dim light, staring at an old portrait on the wall. She didn't turn around, but she spoke as if she knew they were there. "I was wondering when you'd show up," she said. Reynolds felt his breath hitch. She wasn't alone. And that's when they saw the shadow move behind her. Reynolds' fingers instinctively tensed near his holster. His breath caught between control and panic. The dim light flickered, casting long shadows across the old wooden floor. The figure behind Eleanor shifted slightly, just enough for them to see it wasn't just some trick of the light. Someone was standing there. Carter took a cautious step forward, his voice low but firm. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from whoever that is." Eleanor didn't move. She stayed perfectly still, her gaze locked on the old portrait in front of her. "There's no need for that, officers," she said, her voice eerily calm. "I came here to finish something I should have done a long time ago." Reynolds' pulse pounded in his ears. "Who's with you?" he demanded. A deep exhale came from the shadows, and then a man stepped forward. His face caught the light, and for a split second, time seemed to stop. He was older, his sharp features lined with age, but his eyes, cold, calculating, were very much alive. Reynolds didn't recognize him immediately, but the way Eleanor looked at him told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't a stranger. This was someone from her past. Carter tensed. "Sir, I need you to identify yourself." The man chuckled, low and humorless. "You won't find my name in any of your databases." He turned slightly toward Eleanor, his expression unreadable. "You really came back after all these years." Eleanor finally turned, meeting his gaze with something between defiance and sorrow. "I had to," she said. "I owed it to her." Reynolds felt the pieces start clicking together in his mind. The Langford estate. The missing person case he barely remembered. The whispers of a scandal that had never been fully uncovered. And then it hit him. Years ago, a young woman had disappeared from this very house. A maid, barely out of her teens. The case had never been solved, lost to time and speculation. But now, standing here, Reynolds could feel the weight of it. This wasn't just a memory for Eleanor. It was a secret she had carried for decades. Carter's jaw tightened. What happened here? Eleanor inhaled sharply, her fingers trembling slightly before she clenched them into a fist. "The truth," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The truth happened here, and now it's time for it to come out." The man beside her didn't flinch, but there was something in his posture, something uneasy. And then, before anyone could react, he moved. Fast, straight toward Carter. Carter barely had time to react. The man lunged, his movements swift despite his age. Carter stepped back, reaching for his weapon, but before he could draw it, Eleanor did something neither officer expected. She stepped in front of him. "Stop." Her voice cut through the tension like a knife. The man froze mid-step, his eyes locked onto hers. The rage that had been brewing in his expression flickered, just for a second, into something else. Something almost like regret. Reynolds had his hand on his holster, ready for anything, but he hesitated. Something about this didn't feel like a simple attack. This was personal. Eleanor held the man's gaze, her voice trembling but firm. "I know what you did. I know why you did it. But this isn't the way." Carter straightened, regaining his stance, but he didn't move to cuff the man yet. He was waiting, just like Reynolds, to understand what exactly they had just walked into. The man's breathing was heavy, his hands clenched at his sides. "You don't get to stand here and pretend you're innocent," he said, his voice rough. "You walked away from all of it. From her asterisk." Both men exchanged glances, caught off guard by the question. Neither of them knew it yet, but they were about to find out why she was really here. Reynolds shifted his weight, exchanging a quick glance with Carter before answering. "I guess it depends," he said cautiously. "On the person, on what they did." The woman nodded, as if she had expected that answer. She droned her fingers lightly against the steering wheel, staring ahead for a moment before speaking again. And what if someone did something, because they had no other choice? Carter folded his arms, his curiosity piqued. "Are we talking about someone in particular, ma'am?" She turned her gaze back to them, and for the first time, there was something in her expression, something deeper, something unspoken. "Maybe," she said, "or maybe I'm just thinking out loud." Reynolds felt an uneasy feeling creep into his chest. There was a weight in her words, a heaviness that made it clear she wasn't just making small talk. He glanced back at her ID in his mind, remembering her full name. Eleanor Sinclair ***, that name carried power. Influence. But there was something else about it, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. Then it hit him. He had seen that name before, but not just in business articles or interviews. He had seen it in an old case file years ago, back when he was still in training. Something about a real estate deal gone wrong. A missing person. A scandal that had nearly ruined a powerful family. The details were blurry, but one thing was clear. Her name had been tied to something far bigger than business. Carter, still unaware of Reynolds' realization, gave a polite nod. "Well, everyone deserves a second chance, I suppose." Eleanor smiled at that, but it wasn't the kind of smile that put people at ease. It was knowing, measured. "Good," she said, "because that's why I'm here." Reynolds couldn't shake the tension in his gut. Here as in this town. Eleanor turned her head slightly, looking out toward the dimly lit road ahead. "I haven't been back in decades," she said, "but I never forgot it. Every street, every building, every person I left behind." Her words sent a chill down Reynolds' spine. It wasn't just nostalgia in her voice, it was something else. Regret, guilt, or something even deeper? Carter, oblivious to this shift in tone, nodded toward the road. "Well, we won't keep you any longer, ma'am. You have a safe night." Eleanor's fingers tapped against the wheel again, slow and deliberate. She exhaled, then looked at them one last time. "You boys be careful out here," she said. Sometimes the past has a way of catching up when you least expect it. With that, she rolled up her window and pulled away, leaving the officers standing in the red glow of her taillights, a lingering unease settling between them. Reynolds watched the car disappear into the night, his mind racing. He didn't know what it was yet, but something told him this wasn't just a chance encounter. Eleanor Sinclair hadn't come back just to take a drive down memory lane. She was here for a reason. And whatever that reason was, it wasn't over yet. The night air felt heavier than before. Reynolds and Carter stood in silence for a moment, both watching the taillights fade into the distance. There was something unsettling about the whole interaction, something that lingered even after she was gone. Reynolds finally broke the silence. "You ever hear that name before?" Carter shrugged, shaking his head. "Not really. Just know she's rich. Like crazy rich." "Why?" Reynolds hesitated. He wasn't sure how much to say. He barely even understood it himself. "I think I saw her name in an old case file once. Something big. But I can't remember the details." Carter raised an eyebrow. "You think she was involved in something?" "I don't know," Reynolds admitted, his mind still turning. "But she didn't come back here just for a drive. I could feel it." Carter exhaled, rubbing his jaw. "All right, say you're right. What does a billionaire have to do with this asterisk town?" Reynolds didn't have an answer. Not yet. But he had a feeling they weren't done with Eleanor Sinclair. That feeling was confirmed less than an hour later. They had just resumed their patrol when a call came in over the radio. Dispatch sounded tense. "Officers, we've got a disturbance reported at the old Langford estate. Possible trespasser. No forced entry, but neighbor says they saw someone inside. Owner is out of town." Reynolds' stomach dropped. The Langford estate. He knew that name too. And it wasn't just any house. It was one of the oldest mansions in town, long abandoned, its history tangled with rumors and unfinished stories. He grabbed the radio. "Copy that. We are en route." It was just another routine evening for Officers Carter and Reynolds as they cruised down a quiet suburban street. They had been on patrol for hours, watching for anything out of place, when a sleek black luxury car rolled past them, going just a little under the speed limit. At first glance, there was nothing suspicious about it, until they noticed the out-of-state plates and a minor issue with a taillight. Standard protocol kicked in. They flicked on their lights, signaling for the driver to pull over. The car smoothly came to a stop. The officers exchanged a quick glance before stepping out, approaching the driver's side with the usual caution. As the tinted window rolled down, they were met with something they didn't expect. An elderly black woman sitting calmly behind the wheel, her eyes sharp, her posture poised. She looked dignified, dressed in a way that spoke of quiet wealth, yet there was an air of warmth about her. "Ma'am, do you know why we pulled you over?" Officer Carter asked, keeping his voice firm but professional. The woman smiled, her expression unreadable. "I assume it's because of the taillight," she said smoothly. Her voice carried the kind of confidence that made both officers pause for half a second. There was no nervousness, no fumbling for words, just calm certainty. Reynolds, the younger of the two officers, glanced at Carter before speaking. "Yes, ma'am. Just a routine stop. Can we see your license and registration?" Without hesitation, she reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a pristine leather wallet. As she handed over her ID, Carter caught a glimpse of the name printed on it. His brows knitted together. The name rang a bell, but he couldn't quite place it. Reynolds, however, had already pulled out his phone, running the name through a quick search out of curiosity. And that's when his expression changed. His eyes widened slightly before darting up to meet hers. His posture straightened, his tone shifting almost instantly. "Wait, you're her asterisk?" he asked, nearly stumbling over his words. The woman simply smiled again, her eyes twinkling with something between amusement and patience. "Yes, officer." that would be me. And in that moment, everything about the traffic stop changed. Reynolds felt a rush of nerves as he glanced at Carter, who was still staring at the ID in his hands. There was a weight to the moment, a realization settling in that they had unknowingly stopped someone far beyond their usual encounters. The name on the card didn't just sound familiar. It belonged to a woman whose face had graced magazine covers, whose name had been whispered in powerful rooms, whose influence stretched far beyond this quiet roadside stop. Carter cleared his throat, trying to mask his own surprise. I just need a moment, ma'am," he said, stepping back toward the patrol car. He kept his posture straight, professional, but inside, his mind was racing. What were the odds? A billionaire, asterisk this asterisk billionaire, driving alone through their small town at night. He needed to double-check, needed to be sure. Reynolds, still standing by the car, swallowed hard. "I just have to ask," he said carefully, choosing his words. "What brings you out here, ma'am?" The woman tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into a knowing smile. "Business," she said simply, and a bit of nostalgia. Reynolds nodded slowly, but her answer only deepened the mystery. He had read about her before, how she built her empire from the ground up, how she became one of the wealthiest women in the country. But there was no mention of any connection to this town. It didn't make sense. Carter returned, his face unreadable. He handed her ID back, but his voice had lost its earlier authority. "Everything checks out, ma'am." There was a beat of hesitation. "I didn't realize." His sentence trailed off, unsure how to finish. The woman chuckled softly, shaking her head. "It's all right, officer. You were just doing your job." Reynolds exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "If you don't mind me asking, why are you driving yourself? No security? No driver?" She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "Because sometimes I like to remember where I came from." That answer sent a chill through Reynolds. He didn't know what it meant exactly, but he could tell there was a story buried in those words. Something deeper, something she wasn't saying. Carter shifted uncomfortably. "Well, we don't want to keep you any longer, ma'am." But the woman didn't start her car just yet. Instead, she looked up at them both, her expression thoughtful. "Tell me something, officers," she said. "Do you believe in second chances,